I watched a clip of Kamala Harris on her election campaign called the Economic Opportunity Tour. It's a campaign mainly targeting Black communities and minorities overall.
We have now proposed that if you were raised in a family where the folks who raised you were not homeowners, when you want to go buy a home, you will be entitled to a $25,000 grant toward down payment for a home.
She's doing this because of her ambitions to break the social heritage of poverty and to promote intergenerational wealth, is what she calls it. I just see a few drawbacks to that, stimulating the economy in a way like that. First of all, if you, on a governmental level, inject money into a market like the housing market by giving young people grants of, let's say, $25,000, you inject extra money into the market, which means overall that the housing prices will rise if you don't build more houses to absorb the extra liquidity coming into the market. And that will create inflation on the housing market. Now, the first young people of that year that will enter the housing market with $25,000 in their pocket as a grant will benefit from the money from the government. But next year, you will have the next line of young people wanting to buy a home. And then I ask, well, will they receive a grant of $25,000 as well? Because if you don't give them $25,000 as well, then the young people from the previous year will have pushed up prices on the housing market. And the next year's young people will have to pay that difference, meaning they'll have to pay even more for a new home if they don't get that grant. So as a consequence of initiating a government subsidy like this, you will have to repeat that subsidy every year for every new young couple that wants to buy a home. Otherwise, they're going to pay the difference of those rising prices over the years without the grant. So you have to keep the grant going perpetually in the years to come if the next young people are not going to pay the penalty for the government raising housing prices as a result of injecting money into that market. And by this, the government creates a vicious cycle for young people. If they remove the grant, then the next young people will have to pay the penalty of rising prices as a result of government intervention in the housing market. So that's the effect of artificial intervention from governments in markets. It creates problems that politicians rarely think about when they initiate these programs. And people usually get to pay in the end, not politicians. As a reply to that, I'd say don't stimulate the economy with public money. Keep it private. I live in Denmark, and in Denmark, there's now talk about young people wanting to buy houses with their pension savings, meaning if they buy their first house, their first home, with their pension savings, the stimulation of the economy will be from private money, private capital. The money going into the market will not be taxpayer money, it'll be private money. Private individuals will actually have to have worked for this money, paid taxes of it, saved it, in order to inject it into the housing market, or any market for that reason. But that doesn't mean it doesn't have drawbacks. I mean, if you put extra money into a market, it will squeeze somebody out. So the people who don't have the money to participate in this game. If you spend your reserves, like your retirement savings, on buying your way into the housing market, then that is unexpected money being put into the market. And it will, of course, affect the pricing on the housing market, increasing the prices on the housing market even more and faster than originally intended, which means somebody will have to pay the price. There will be people who no longer will be able to afford buying their way into the housing market. In Denmark, it'll be young people who don't have pension savings. If some young people will have pension savings to use in the housing market, then the young people without pension savings will not be able to participate in that game. And they risk being squeezed out of the housing market because they will not be able to gather capital fast enough before the prices on the housing market has simply outrun them at the pace that the housing market is moving. So I know people are cheering for politicians when they say they're going to grant some people money to get into some market or get a head start in the economy or whatever. But everybody should be aware that there are consequences when you do that. There's no such thing as a free lunch, especially not when politicians are making promises, and especially in an election year. So among all the promises that Kamala Harris is making in this time, and other politicians as well, because, well, they're politicians, I want people to think for themselves. I hope people think about the consequences when you want to interfere in markets, especially the housing markets. And we've seen how that can go. The financial crisis of 2008, just to mention one thing. And the only antidote towards things like this is human beings being responsible. Human beings thinking about the consequences of artificial intervention, and human beings, thinking about the society, thinking about other people besides themselves, thinking about what is good for our economy and our society, and scrutinizing the messages of politicians, especially. So I hope people will take that into account when they have to vote, and no matter what country you live in, that you analyze what you're being told and by whom you're being told these things, and you think for yourself, and you take responsibility accordingly. I hope to see you in the next video.